Hi everybody, thank you very much to come here. I'm Inaki Villar and I'm going to talk about Work Manager. Okay, since this year in the last Google I/O, we have seen that we have the Jetpack, right? So there are a lot of Android developers here, but still if you are a student and you want to develop in Android, now it's more easy. Jetpack is like a group of all the products of Google of Android to develop, right? So before, if you want to do something with architecture components, like we saw before with Egg, so you have to use one library. Then if you want to use something with testing, another library. And Google has tried to combine all together in this service. So if you need to do, for example, something with a user interface, you have some part with the fragments, with the animations, and the same for everything. And one of the parts is the work manager, and that's the topic of this session. So the definition is makes it easy to specify deferrable asynchronous tasks and when they should run. So my first thought, and I think that a lot of people was thinking that again, another thing to work with background tasks. Actually, this week I tried to ask some colleagues, you one of them, and I was asking you as Android developer, what do you would use if you want to execute something in background? And honestly, guys, so I didn't have the same response for everybody. So everybody was saying one thing and another thing, and it's true, right? So if I ask you, what do you want to execute in a background task, you're going to say something or another question. And that's why I want to, well, because the working manager is something a little bit boring, try to be a little fun about how is, for example, a real story about one developer that wants to learn how to execute a background task. Okay? Okay, this is the application that is an app that is called Android Ninja Warriors Rockstars Experts, because you know we are very good developers. Okay, let's try it. Sawadee krap, Pongkunak patana Android application, Pommi kantam jangtam pukun. Dailei tamalei. It's very hard, guys, so honestly, yeah. App compon yachuam torcap server. Tar pommi new updates. Tuk tuk song chuam mong. Pom mai ruwa tamai. The first rule is don't block the main thread. Okay. So, this is kun samachai thread die. What? Are you kidding me? Are you from the past? So you can use an async task better than a thread. And we start with a discussion, right? Ha 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 ha. Guys, are you Android developers? You know what is a service? Huh? Arena? Service? No, intent service, my Thai service, intent service. And the guy is going, what? Huh? Arena? And continue. I have more, well, I don't know how to simulate the British accent, but it would be something like, I have more than 20 years of experience and always working with thread pool executors. Do you think that the poor guy is asking for thread pool executors? Google is providing job schedulers, more easy. Job schedulers? RX. 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 RX? Don't worry, these kids likes a lot of RX Java, but then they don't know what is a looper and handler. Oh yes, Kun Samachai, Windows 95 with COBOL and thread pool executor. Sorry, but still, I don't know how to execute a background task. Why you don't search in Google these things? But I'm here to ask questions, right? And I was forced to leave the group, actually, right? So, but hey, I'm late for the party. You can use coroutines. And that's how was it, right? So the poor guy was asking for something. It was a syntax, thread pool executors, schedulers, job dispatchers, handlers, threads, coroutines, service, and that's it. So still it's not quite clear, right? So, and I'm sure that, again, so I asked some guys from Agoda, and never I had the same response. But let's talk another real story. That's the second part. And well, imagine that I was in the group and I was kicked out, right? Because my questions. And I'm going to be a good citizen. And I'm going to have the motivation like this Apple and trying to search in Google. Okay, background task in Android. Nice. So I have guide to background processing. And the second one is create a background service. Put the intent service, class provides, whatever. So I'm going to use a service. But I'm going to investigate a little bit more. And in Google, in the API 26, include some things like you cannot create, well, you cannot start a service because it's throwing an exception. So, wow, I mean that's okay. My target API is 25. I'm not going to use that. But later, Google Play now says that will require that all the apps has to target API 28, API 26. So we are on the same picture, right? So service, it cannot be used. Okay. My Apple start to be not so motivated. Job scheduler. So job scheduler actually is something that has to work, but it has one little problem that it's added in the API 21. But still, so if you have the compatibility with 21, it's full of bugs. So the recommendation from Google and Google engineers is to use job scheduler with API 23, not with 21, but it's available. So that's my problem because my PO has told me that my app has to have min SDK 16. So I cannot use job schedulers. Next one, well, the Apple, the motivation is going down, down, down. Firebase Job Dispatcher, that's very good. It's like a compatibility with the job scheduler for previous versions. So far, so good. But my PO or my manager, whatever, say that I want that you use your application in China, for example, without Google Play services. And you have to have Google Play services. So I cannot do anything. I cannot ask in a group. I cannot search in Google. But besides that, so I have more things, the dose mode, the background restriction apps, the app standby, the cache wake logs. So these are the things that are put together and have some kind of this situation where I don't know still what to do when I want to execute a simple background task, right? And being compatible. And that's why Google released Work Manager, and that's, well, being from Agoda, right? Always you have to think which problem it's solving this thing, right? It's not like, hey, I'm very cool, I have this library. So Work Manager actually solve a lot of problems that we have seen before. Like, for example, the compatibility with the backwards compatibility with previous versions. It solves as well the restrictions with the background execution, like in the API 26, as we have seen. Has to be, and it's adding some characteristics, like has to be chainable, so that means that we have to combine different tasks. Has to be queryable, because we want to know what's the status of this task. And finally, has to be opportunistic. And that means that, for example, if I have to charge my phone, maybe my task has to be executed. Let's go, we will see later. So that's how, if still you are a little bit confused, you have to look this graph. So on the top, that's the thing that we want to execute. When I want to execute a task, has to be at the same moment. On the bottom is I don't care, right? Maybe I want to execute the background task, but it has to be in 10 minutes. On the left, we have the best effort. On the right, we have the guarantee execution. Okay. So here we can understand better what's all this mess of background tasks. We have, for example, the thread pool executor is like we want to execute now and with the best effort. That's mean getting benefit of the resources of the phone. Here, thread pool executor can be an scheduler from RxJava and can be a coroutines. The same when we want to defer a task, can be with a thread pool executor, with an RxJava, and with coroutines too. But if we want to go to the warranted execution, still we can use foreground service in Android. So the thing that we cannot use is the background services. But the foreground service is okay. So that means that you have the app on the foreground and you have to execute something. But if we want to defer a task and has to be a warranty execution, is where we have the job scheduler, job dispatcher, alert manager, plus broadcast receivers. So, and it's here where the work manager is going to work. Okay, so think about it, because maybe if you are using a lot of RX Java, like these kids, maybe you are forgotten about the basic things, but it's quite important to understand later in for example, in the testing, if you understand how works the main, the loopers, handlers, or the thread pool executors, is going to be easier to work with that. And how works under the hood, so the work manager. So first of all, you have to ask, internally, sorry, it's asking that the API that you are using is greater than 23. If it's yes, it's going to use under the hood job scheduler, and the job scheduler is going to send to the executor through IPC, interprocess communication, the task that you want to execute. But you don't have to do anything. You have to use work manager, and this is going to happen in case that you have API greater than 23. If not, it's going to ask if you have Play Service. If you have Google Play Service, API minor than 23, you are going to use, or internally is going to use Firebase Job Dispatcher. And if not, internally is going to use alert manager and broadcast receivers. Okay, and it is, but by default, you don't have to do anything. So, but that's quite interesting. And look, this thing of the API 23 of the JEP scheduler. Before, Google was recommending to use 21, but actually they are filtering to 23. Okay, so if you want to use Work Manager, we have different artifacts, the runtime, testing, extensions, but we are going only to see in the runtime, because with this runtime, you can do whatever you want. Another thing is like everything is in the Android X. So you saw in the Google I/O we have the Jetpack, but then all these support libraries, testing, architecture components even. So now it's under the Android X package. So there are 4 main parts in the Work Manager API: the worker, the work request, the work manager, and the work status. So let's start with the worker. The worker, so it's the most basic action to execute a task, right? It's only it's a small class, and it has like the UI, the UID, an ID, internal ID, because maybe you want to check something with one of the properties was that it was queryable, and the extras. That's something that we are going to talk later. And the contract, it's quite simple. It has to do a work, right? My task, it has to do a work, and it's going to have a different result: success, failure, or retry. And you can check, of course, if it's the status, if it's canceled, if it's stopped. The work request is becoming more interesting, because it's like given a worker, so I want to add some specific indications at the time to execute this work, and can be constraints or backup criteria, right? Imagine that you want to do I don't know, you're doing some network stuff. One of the common approach in the real world is using exponential backup. But with the constraints, and that's the cool thing, you can try to define that your task can have some requirements. Like, for example, the network has to be Wi-Fi. So the battery should be you have to have battery, the storage the same, and the device idle. So, and with these constraints, we can achieve the results with the new versions of Android, right? Because actually, when you have the DOS mode that was included in Marshmallow, so you cannot execute this background task with your devices in DOS mode, right? So in here, you can try to achieve a good result with that. And this is this is an abstract class actually, and you have two implementations. That's one-time word request. That's very clear. What's the meaning? And periodic word request in case that you want to do something specific or periodically. But of course, you can try to add your specific word request. The work manager, it's the third part, and it's like the core of the library. And in terms of to say what's the most important part of you can understand is going to be enqueue and cancel, right? Given that you have a worker, this worker has a work request, you are going to enqueue in your work manager. The same for cancel. And you have different combinations to begin the work if you want to try to achieve different results. Finally, the work status is when the work request has been scheduled in the executor, you can check the status, right? And you have the information about the ID, the state, the data again, and the tags. So the state, that's the final state of the work status, can be blocked, cancel, enqueue, fail, running, or succeed. So that means that always you can ask for the status of the work. Let's see a little bit more code, not boxes. Okay, this is a simple worker. Simple, right? So we are implementing the abstract class, and we have my long task process, and after that, I'm returning a result. As simple as that. So if you have to do something in a background task, you can create this worker. Here, the same one, I'm trying to add some data. Imagine that I was saying that at the beginning that you have extras on the worker. These extras, you can put some data there. It's not on storage. That's something that Google is saying very serious. You don't have to put things like we are doing in the bundles, right, in the between the activities. Here it's something that, for example, if you want to calculate the result of a very long process, the timestamp or IDs, whatever, you can store this in the worker, and then you can check the result. Again, so we have our worker. Now it's moment to create our work request. So the work request, quite simple. I have said that we have two, the one-time worker request, and the builder, it's only to add the process data that we have created. The same if we are using the periodic work request, okay? But only we have to specify the interval of time. By default, it's 15 minutes minimum. So you cannot specify 5 or 10 minutes. Android and Google is very serious in this topic. We don't want to drain the battery of the users. So that's why if you want to execute something periodic, it's about 15 minutes. And here is how we define the constraints actually for our work request. Here I'm saying that I want to be that the network type has to be connected. So I don't care if it's Wi-Fi or if it's 3G. My task requires that it has to be charging the phone, because I don't want to drain the battery, and the device has to be idle. So I think that this should be like when we are sleeping, right? So because charging, device idle, and I have to be connected. And look how easy it's trying to define this, how to define these constraints at time to execute something. And then finally, with the work manager that we have said, only we have to enqueue the process that we are defining. As simple as that. So here we are going to see two of the things that we were saying at the beginning of the talk, and it was like it has to be you have to have the ability to check what's the status of the task, of course, right? And we have here get status by ID with the process ID. It's the same process that we have defined before, but in that case we are checking by the ID. So get the status by ID, if we check the signature, is more than the same thing that we were saying before with egg, a live data. So under the hood, work manager is using live data to check the results. Now you understand later why. And if we are observing, because in the here we are observing, we want to check if the state of the work request is finished. So actually it's implemented with the lifecycle owner API. So you have to see the whole picture. So under the hood, work manager is using architecture components. So that's the continuation of the previous tag, of course. Okay, simple, right? So I mean, do I have one task? I want to execute in background, worker, work request, work manager. That's it. But, well, come on, so life is not easy, right? And I have, for example, 4 processes, and I want to combine all these different processes. So like this. That's something normal. Actually, for example, for us in Agoda, so we are struggling with the beginning, so how to combine the different startup, for example. So with our work manager, it's quite easy. So even here, we can start the process with two processes parallel, and then the process 3 is going to wait until process 1 and process 2 is finished. When it's finished, the process 3 is going to execute the process 4. So, and you can try to compose the different background tasks that you have to execute. Let's put things harder. In that case, it's not like before. Before we have two parallel processes and then two sequential processes. Here we have two sequential processes, but at the same time are parallel, right? How we can combine this? So quite easy, we have to create like a different chains, and then combine them together. So first of all, we have to create the process 1 and then the process 2 for the chain 1, that's the most left. Then for the right, we are going to do the same, process the first one, process 3, and then the process 4. And then we can combine the chains all together. So it's quite flexible, I think, in that case. Right, and you can try to do whatever. So here there is like this class, work continuation. Work continuation is only a composition class to trying to only for the one-time worker request work together. Okay, a little bit more advanced. Maybe you're wondering, so how it's possible to execute everything with these executors and how it works. So actually the interface is quite simple. So, and you have to think in like everything in Android. So you have execute background thread. So you're going to execute something in background, and then you have to communicate, maybe, that's not required in case of working manager, to the main thread, right? So that's something that we are doing everything. If you see the implementation for the background thread, we are using an executor, an executor framework from the Java concurrency package, and from the main thread, we are trying to acquire the main looper from the Android system. There are two implementations: the default task executor and the work manager task executor. But this is open, right? Because maybe you are saying that, oh well, I want to use schedulers to apply this. So you can try to create your task executor with schedulers, and it's going to be used instead of the normal executor. So it's very flexible in that case. And what about testing, right? So for us is very important, the testing part. And actually is following the same trick that we have seen always, for example, with Espresso. When we try to wrap an executor service, we try to inject one new task executor, and here, before we say that we are going to defer the execution of the task in the future, in the test, we don't want to do that. In the test, we want to execute the task at the moment, right? Imagine that the same with RX Java. When you are testing something with a subscriber, you are trying to trigger the executor always, the schedule, right? So the same for here. Here we have different tools, but to understand, if you try to wrap the actual executor with one executor that is running at the same time, so it's going to be easy for the test. This is a common technique in all the frameworks. If you want more details, we can talk later. So in the testing part, we have the work manager, test init helper, that is depending of the test work manager implementation. At the same time, the test work manager implementation is using the test driver. Why a test driver? Because we are using a lot of constraints, like idle, like connected, whatever. In the test, we should try to abstract these things, right? So that's why we have a driver where we can mock the behaviors, or we can try to display different scenarios at time to use our test. And finally, so we have two specific class, like a synchronous executor. That's something that is related with the previous one, that I don't want to defer my actions in the future in the test. And then we have a test scheduler too. If you are in testing, it's quite interesting, the package or the artifact for testing in the work manager. Okay, one thing that it's cool of the work manager API is like it's using a lot of things from Google, right? It's not only that I'm using my library and that's it. We have seen before that we are using live data, and lifecycle owners, so architecture components, and under the hood is using room too. Because why you need live data? For example, inside the work manager, because if you are storing the data or if you are storing the information of your workers in a database, then when something has happened, you can update these registers and react to these changes. So, and that's why this database, it's composed by different, the central entities, the work spec, where when you want to run a task, that's the main table, the main entity, and then you have the different information surrounded. So that means that if your process is finished, you update the entity, and you have a live data that is listening to these changes, your activity is going to get these changes. So neat, and using all the components from Google and from Android in that case. So a little bit summary. Work Manager, it's okay to upload pictures, big files to the server, to parse data and store in the database. It's not okay to parse data and update contents of a view. Process payment transactions. And as I said before, it's not a data store. So the extras of the worker class, it's only to retrieve some kind of information about the process, about the worker, not that. And this keep in mind, right? Because maybe you want to join the conversation of the chat before and say, yeah, no, work manager for everything. No. So I mean, the work manager is very specific things. If you want to defer actions in the future, that you don't care about if it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes, only when the constraints of the restrictions of the phone are achieved, and that's it. Okay, about links and reference of this talk. So we have, we have the code lab, for example, of the work manager. That's something that is, well, always trying to play a little bit very good. Then if you try to search in Google, there are thousands of Medium articles, but there is this article from Egg, the previous speaker, about work manager is very complete, so I think that is the longer one. And of course, the video where they were presenting the background processing, the work manager. So they are commenting more things about tags, that's something specific to trying to identify the workers that you are executing, but you can take a look, it's 30 minutes, so quite good. So thank you. First of all, I want to thank all these guys that I don't know, honestly. So I hope that you don't have any problem to get some icons from internet and put them. And thank you very much to you, to Bert, to all of the organizers, because this conference is awesome. Thank you, guys.